Morning, everybody, and welcome to Strategy Cafe, which is your shot of leadership inspiration from us here at Alembic Strategy. I'm pleased to have so many new subscribers this month and to see you all online this morning. Cafe is our leadership magazine, and we like to pick up interesting topics and interview successful leaders for their tips. And I suppose one of the key reasons we do it this way is that I think it works quite nicely that when you hear the passion of our interviewee and you hear the context for the leadership, it really brings the theory and the practice to life. We've got an amazing back catalogue now of Strategy Cafe webinars. So if you haven't yet seen them, please go and follow the links to our iTunes podcast, or to our to our iTunes podcast or to our YouTube channel, and you can dig in and around the subjects there. They cover a huge range of leadership topics, so fabulously interesting. So go and have a look, and please subscribe and please share. Welcome, Phil.
Good morning, Nick. Absolutely fantastic to be with you this morning.
Tell us a little bit about you.
Well, thank you. I noticed your introduction, by the way, referring to how the Strategy Cafe introduces people to successful leaders. So I guess thanks for the compliment. Not sure it's fully deserved, but maybe we can explore that a little bit in conversation. So thanks for that. Yeah, absolutely delighted to be here. My name, as it says on the side, is Phil James, and I'm the CEO with the Institute of Leadership and Management. I have the best job in the world, Nick, because as well as being, I guess, a senior manager within the organization, I get to deal with, think about, discuss, and sort of delve into issues around leadership and management every day, which is absolutely fantastic. I know it's the stuff of your life and your work at Alembic as well. And it's the stuff that really fires me up as well. So it's a fantastic job. And I have to say, here comes the sales pitch, a fantastic organization to be a part of as well. So for anybody that hasn't come across the Institute before, do check out the Institute of Leadership Management's website. Loads of free resources, webinars like yours, Nick, fantastic back catalogue of wonderful speakers, research papers, podcasts, all sorts of stuff for anyone that's interested, like me and like you, Nick, in just getting a little bit better at leadership every day.
Fantastic. It is really good, and heartily recommend everyone to go and have a look at it. So let's get into things. I was just very curious as to how you became CEO of the Institute of Leadership Management, and when we were talking about this, you sort of started out in construction, so it's kind of quite a curious journey. So just take everyone through how you got from building properties to leading leaders. That's kind of a good story.
Yeah, it is a curious story. Maybe I should have had a plan and a strategy well laid out in front of me and followed that, and things might have turned out a little better. I started out in construction, so I was lucky enough to go to university straight out of school, and at the time there was high graduate unemployment, and I wanted to do something that was useful and, quite honestly, held a prospect of getting a great job. And I was really drawn to the prospect of the construction industry. It was an industry at the time that was looking for I guess an influx of talent to make the industry better, more productive, safer, more profitable. And for me, the idea of getting involved in such a tangible and challenging project as putting up a building, for example, was a huge attraction. And I went into that with all gusto. But I have to say, it didn't take me very long before I became quite disillusioned about what was going on and what I was sort of seeing around me in terms of management practice, I guess, as much as anything. Quite a lot of adversarial attitude, I suppose. The idea of making money was all born out of screwing the little guy, really, rather than doing an amazing job, I suppose. And I have to caveat this was my experience, and this was a long time ago. So for anybody that's still working in construction industry, I know it's transformed significantly since then, but I didn't have a very good experience at all, and I was keen to advance and get on. And I thought, well, the way to do that maybe is to go and seek further opportunities for practicing management. So I continue to learn. I continue to study management. I did a few other qualifications. I moved into the quarrying industry, so I got to play with even bigger machines and dig bigger holes into the ground. And that was fantastic. Really great part of my life. Got to spend all of the day outdoors and tackling some really interesting and tough stuff, and heading up a small team of people, which was superb. Really, the real stuff of leadership and management. So, and then goodness knows how I ended up where I am now. I eventually took a job with a professional body in construction. So there was the professional link. I went to work for the Chartered Institute of Building, which still today is an amazing organisation, and really one that's concerned around standards and professionalism, and really driving up that quality of management practice and industry practice right across the board. And I guess from there, I kind of got captured by this world of professional associations, and went to work for a while in social work, so different industry, different sector, different profession, but still aligned with this idea of raising standards, of professionalism, of looking after people, I suppose, throughout their careers. And that eventually led me to where I am now, I suppose, to cut a very odd and winding story short.
It's a curious journey to get to be the head of the the institute that leads leaders. But I think what we all heard in there is that disillusionment with practice on the ground, and in particular with the way that things were managed and led, and then a connection with this idea that you can help everybody in the industry, which I really like. It really resonates with me, because I think that's the job of leaders in a way, is to leadership affects so many people. And that's really why we, in a core mission, that's why we focus on the leaders, helping the leaders, because where the way they take things forward cascades down across all the team, all the families, all the suppliers, all the customers. It has such a wide impact. So the idea that you can kind of leverage that by raising the standards at the industry body level, I think, is really powerful. I think that neatly takes into. So tell us about how ILM does that. How does ILM live that mission, and how can people learn and develop themselves through the standard setting that you guys do and teaching around that?
Yeah, so what's different, I suppose, about leadership management to something like the social work profession, or construction, or surveying, or accountancy, and so on? Mm-hmm. Well, there are lots of similarities, of course, and the Institute of Leadership Management as an organisation is concerned with standards, and we're very firmly rooted in the idea of solid evidence-based practice. And the idea of standards arising from our sort of advancing knowledge of what works and what doesn't work, what good practice is in different contexts and what it's not. And that continues to change, I think, as the world moves on. So I think leadership management, although it seems quite amorphous at times, and is for me anyway, is something that is highly dependent on context. I'm sure we'll come on to talk about this in a little while. You can nevertheless, I think, find very good solid ground for identifying standards that give people a starting point, if nothing else. And the way that the Institute has attacked that, I suppose, that issue, is we have a sort of framework for leadership that's based on 5 dimensions. And everything we do, whether it's publishing articles in Edge magazine, you can probably see pictures of the front cover of Edge magazine behind me. So any of our commentary, any of our writing, conferences, all of our learning materials and so on are based around and rooted in this framework, this golden thread, I suppose, that links everything together, and is rooted in high standards of practice. But having said that, Nick, I think that's probably where we reach a point of departure from other professional bodies, maybe, in that that sort of framework gives us a very solid underpinning for what leadership management is, what the components of it are. But we're very, very keen to emphasize, as I just mentioned, the contextual nature of leadership and management. Leadership management, it strikes me, sort of changes every day, depending on what's happening around you in the workplace, people's moods. It's certainly dependent on the industry that you're in, the organization you're working for, what's new, what's not so new. And all of that needs to be taken into consideration. And in my opinion, there are limits to how much you can, write that down and structure that in a framework. So whilst there
Yep.
are elements of leadership and management that represent good practice, if you like, there's an awful lot of leadership and management that I think is necessarily down to interpretation and down to context. And so again, you can see on the slide there that you have in front of you, we're talking about issues in leadership and management all the time, but we're very, very keen actually to get a conversation going rather than push out a view that says it's not like this, it's like this. We're much more about leadership management being about a live conversation, I think, to explore difficulties as they unfold on a day-to-day basis. So that's I guess our take on standards and why I think we're approached that slightly differently to what you might see in other professions and other industries.
Yep. So today I'm interviewing Phil James, who's CEO of the Institute of Leadership Management. And in a minute, we're just going to get into the thick of things and just start talking about some of the current thinking around this with a few examples, and come on to what Phil's going to be talking about at our conference. But we're just talking here about I'm guessing the connection between a structured approach to training leadership and how that relates to the sort of on the ground experience. And I think that really resonates with me because and I think that's one of the reasons why Alembic and the ILM kind of work quite well together. Most of our clients are senior leaders, and they have a fairly significant leadership component in their role. And actually, their leadership is really busy. They're faced with issues that come up out of the day-to-day running of the business, day in, day out. They're always a little bit new. They're always a new context. They're always pretty challenging. And there's always a lot of leadership to do, if you know what I mean, because there's decisions to be made to square away those challenges against the various priorities that have to be set for the organization. And I guess that sort of, for me, encapsulates leadership is reacting in the moment in accordance with key principles and current context. And it's pretty challenging. And I think that it's right that you can develop and you can learn the theory and you can learn the skills. And when you relate that to somebody who's got a lot of challenges right now, they can go a long way with that. So I think bringing those two things together, the sort of structure of learning and the conversation about today's challenges, it makes it very, very powerful.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Nick. And just to link back to what I was saying before about the early part of my career, one of my sort of areas of dissonance, I suppose, and disappointment and disillusionment was I found that things in life weren't working like they were meant to according to the textbooks, and you learn that, I suppose, if you're lucky, at a fairly early age. And
Yes.
It's something that still continues to puzzle me because we, generally speaking, in industry and organisations, we have very fixed views around what organisations are, what management is, and forget about what you just said, which is the other half of that sphere, which is the contextualisation. How to make it real on a day-to-day basis according to the challenges that you're facing at the time.
Yeah, so it's really about taking the theory and making it pragmatic. I love it, and I think it's completely right. It certainly chimes with my experience, and I think it would chime with every single client that we work with to help. So let's just get into the thick of things. So one of the things you said, which I thought was really interesting, just sort of challenging current thinking about leadership, is that traditional view is very hierarchical. I think you were kind of challenging that. So wondering whether that's right in contemporary leadership. So what's your point here?
Well, I think when conversations often open up about leadership and what's new about today's world, how things are different with technological disruption, geopolitical disruption, the influence of multi-generations in the workforce, the fact that the robots are coming to take all of our jobs, all of those issues, we tend to say, oh, today's world's very different. Yesterday's world used to be very ordered. And I think what we're calling to is an interpretation of leadership and management that is, as you mentioned, hierarchical. So it's based on ideas of authority and control, the leader out in front, calling the shots, making the decisions, stiff upper lip, almost the sort of command and control style of way of thinking about leadership. And whilst lots of organizations now, I think, have moved on from that and have realized that, hold on, the world doesn't work quite like that anymore. I think there are still large, and so, we've seen the rise of different operational structures, for example, matrix, self-organized teams and so on. Nevertheless, I think still a lot of those sort of underpinning ideas around what leadership is, how it works, still exist, and are aligned to that hierarchical way of thinking about organizations. So control, power, authority, models of communication that are about transmitting a message from the leader to the receiver, who then goes away and does what she or he are supposed to do. And I just think the world is very different to that. And I think when we're experiencing, as we do, and Nick, you must come across this all the time in conversations with your clients, a sort of confusion about how come we've got everything in place, we're doing the right things, I'm trying as a leader to exhibit the right behaviors, I've got an open door policy, and yet still things aren't quite right, they're not going to how I would expect. And whether that manifests itself in productivity issues or profitability or mental health issues in the workplace, or all sorts of problems. I think there's a real I sense today, talking to our clients and in conversation with folks like yourself, Nick, that there's a sort of calling out for a new way of thinking about what it is that we're doing when we're managing in organizations and when we're working together in organizations, that sort of jars and clashes with our expectations of the past, that still continue to pervade everything that we do.
Yeah, I mean, the way I see it, sorry to interrupt you, the way I see it is it is sort of slightly in context. There are times where you need to sort of as a leader, I always like to refer to this as sort of like black belt or karate type leadership. You need to have different moves for different bits of the fight. It may sound too macho for the modern world, but there you go. But you need different moves, and sometimes being clear and being solid and being commanding is good. But if that's your one trick, in the modern age where everyone can see through the organization because of the social tools that we have and the way conversations unfold these days being so different from the way they were even a couple of decades ago, it's impossible to hold command for every context. It just doesn't work in every context. And for me, it's about learning how to manage your communication and choose the right way, which is tricky for the different things that we're unfolding. So it's flexibility, really, as a leader. It's where I would go with it. That's what we see. There's a real shout out for that, so people can still be who they are, but respond differently as the context needs, and not just be a one-trick pony.
Yeah, for sure. And I think coupled with that, I mean, if I can develop that idea a little bit further, I guess I'm guessing that the idea of adapting your style of leadership is not going to be new to many people that are listening in and are taking part in the conversation. But I think what is different is the way that we think about leadership as opposed to the role of a leader. And one of the things that we're keen to do in the Institute is to talk about leadership as a phenomenon, as an interpersonal and a relational thing, as opposed to or alongside a set of traits and qualities within one particular individual. So the way that organizations work, and in some ways have always worked, but we're sort of waking up to this, and the way that organizations will need to adapt in the future, I think, is to have an idea of leadership as something that ebbs and flows between people, as opposed to hiring a successful leader at the top of an organization that is able somehow through charisma and mysticism to inspire great swathes of people beneath them. So,
some magic skill.
Yeah, quite. And I think we're keen to emphasize that, and as our little shared joke has just illustrated, to show that leadership actually isn't some mystical phenomenon that has managed to be somehow bred into people like Richard Branson or the heroic leaders of the world, but but is something that is with us all the time. It's to do with power relationships. It's to do with the way we talk and respond to each other.
Yeah.
And it's a phenomenon, actually, that if it's understood slightly differently in an organization, can be really harnessed
Yeah.
and seen as something that flows through rather than is locked within, the particular skills of the woman or the man at the top that has got all the MBA qualifications and so on.
I love it. So I get this sort of debate that we're having is there's some great leadership out there, but if you want to take that great leadership and really take it further, take it forwards, then it requires you to start to see the challenge or the problems of leadership in a different way, and see them more dispersed and more generally within the organization, and not just residing in the leader or in yourself.
Yeah.
And see also that there's like coming back to the idea of learning leadership, it's once you've kind of got yourself challenged up enough, so there's plenty of leadership stuff to do, is then starting to develop let's say there's 10 key areas or 12 key areas or whatever it is you want to look at, and really understand that it's the combination of expertise in all of those areas that creates that coming together of the greater powers of leadership. And actually work really well once you've got those contexts. It's a really interesting debate, and I think the other thing that you said, which really I thought was interesting to hear, was the language doesn't chime. So we were talking about 2x2 matrices, and so all the traditional sort of consulting tools, and this idea of what we're doing with leadership, we're co-creating a story, and it's all about systems thinking and constellating and etc. And just does that really chime with the reality on the ground? I just tell us about that, because I just unpack that a little bit for everybody. Interesting comment.
Yes. So on that last point, Nick, I think when we engage in leadership education, we go off and we want to be better. So we go and learn. We take a course, take a short course. We go to a seminar. We do an MBA. These sorts of things. And what we see in large part, not universally, but largely in those sorts of endeavors, are references to management tools, techniques, models that are very good, actually, that are tested, that largely are rooted in solid research and peer-reviewed journals and so on and so forth. So they're well grounded. But I think what's very appealing about them, it feels like we're being given the toolkit and the answer to be able to go out and do a better job than we were doing yesterday. And to some extent, that's true. And these a Boston box or a SWOT analysis or whatever it is can help us, look at the world through a different lens and get some insights, and that's really, really cool. But I think where it's taken too far is that we tend to get so seduced by those tools, techniques, and models that we think we have to be masters of them in the way that you described, becoming moving from a brown belt to a black belt or whatever the analogy was.
Yeah.
And that doing a better SWOT analysis will produce better results. And I think we have to be very, very careful that tools and techniques are helpful but have their limitations.
Yep.
And that when we encounter the real world, if you like, that's where the usefulness of some of the tools and techniques can break down, particularly if we are over-reliant on them. So if I can be a little less abstract and give you a practical example, lots of us will spend time writing business plans and proposals and this sort of thing. And there are great formats to follow in doing that, and carrying out an environmental scan and using Pestel to show what's happening in the world and how that is going to affect the launch of your new widget and so on. But those things are great academic exercises and useful, but I think cease to be useful when we start to encounter the real world and the sort of volatility, the uncertainty, and the competitive reaction of other organizations that really come into play. And I think, therefore, they can be constraining about how we think and talk about leadership. So it's very tempting, isn't it, to say, to pick up a leadership book and say, well, today I've got a team meeting and I'm going to adopt a much more country club management style today because I think that's appropriate to where we are. But of course, that completely cuts out and misses out the human element in all of this, and completely ignores what I think is extremely valid, which is that intuition, that interpersonal sensitivity to what is really going on around you as a person amongst other people.
Yeah.
So I think we can overplay these things, and I think management education, quite frankly, needs to move on pretty drastically. Actually, when we hear talk across various industries, whether it's construction, social work, and lots of others, about a leadership gap and what are we going to do, we tend to think, oh, that's about pushing more people through leadership courses and producing more leaders, producing more
Yeah.
managers. Actually, I
Yeah.
think the challenge is much more fundamental than that. It's not a
Yeah.
quantitative problem. I think it's a qualitative problem, in that it's what we're teaching people and how we're educating people to think about leadership and management,
Yeah.
more than a numbers game. And
Yeah.
some of the most enduring qualities, I think, you mentioned learning and mastering tools, techniques. I think some of the most enduring qualities for leadership are things like curiosity, and the ability to reflect,
Yeah.
interpersonal sensitivity, some of these really soft, annoyingly soft and intangible kind of skills or attributes, if you like, but that enable us to work out how we keep moving on together in organisations in a way where I think lots of the tools and techniques of management are falling short.
I mean, it's hugely challenging just listening to you talk. I think there's so much that leadership can encompass. Really, here for me, you're coming down into how leaders can really connect with people, right in front of them. And we had a great example of this with one of my clients the other day. I wouldn't say, my initial thoughts was listening to everything that happened was, gosh, that was a real car crash of a meeting. But then I realized it wasn't really a car crash. It was more that the people who were driving the car, who were leading the meeting, if you like, had forgotten to get the passengers on board at the start. And so
Love the
they'd headed
analogy.
off. Yeah, they'd headed off to, and they were in Windsor. Everyone else is still back in London, and suddenly there was this big gap between where the guys who were leading the meeting were and where their participants were. They'd just forgotten. They just, had their great analysis, their lovely 2x2s and all that kind of stuff. They've just forgotten that all that's really useful, but actually this is just about people. And they
Yeah.
needed to make sure everyone was in the process and engaged with this to start with. It's a really good point. Everyone listening, Phil's happy to take questions, and there's a little area on your GoToWebinar control panel where you can post up questions for him. So he's making some fairly controversial points, I think, and they're really powerful. But if you've got questions for him about how to lead and about things in your organization, or about learning leadership and the different ways of approaching that, please post them up, because we can ask him those just in a few minutes as we come up to the hour. So thank you very much for all of that. I just wanted to move on a little bit and just taking the same point really, but I think what you're going to do for us here is just deepen it. I just wanted to touch on, we're just so privileged. Phil, we've got some amazing speakers for our conference coming up. Phil is one of the speakers doing a really important slot for us, and this is his title. He's come up with this title of we've got a meaningful human leadership conference, and I really love this. He's kind of completely thrown it back at us and said, well, what about the meaningless and the inhuman then? Which it made me giggle, but also is a really serious point here. So without spoilers, too many spoilers, Phil, you were just going to tell us a little story that just really chimes with this point.
Sure, thanks, Nick. Yeah, so we're talking about how without much care, how we can fall into sort of taken for granted assumptions about organizations and what we're doing in leadership and management, that in my opinion often completely lose sight of the individual of people, in the way that you mentioned the superb car crash analogy with forgetting to get people on board. And yeah, just to sort of illustrate this point, you've heard me say this before, Nick. We were chatting over a cup of coffee about this, but I went to a conference around mental health in the workplace, and facing up to the challenge of how to improve general mental health and well-being across organisations. And I think it's apt to be talking about this in Mental Health Awareness Week this week. And I went to this conference, very good, very professionally run, lots of senior people there, largely from the sort of HR and health, safety, well-being space, and very serious people, very dedicated to what they were doing. And I sat in this conference, and as the conference went on, I was kind of increasingly disturbed, and I couldn't put my finger on was going on for me, really. And it was only later on the train home I realised what it was. So what I'd seen was the screens at the back were full of statistics showing how things had or hadn't improved over the previous year. Showing insights for action, how the statistics had started to move and show that better education was starting to have a better impact in certain areas around mental health. There were lots of talk from people about how they'd approach mental health strategies in their organisation with a clear brand and a clear message and communication plan. There was lots of good conversation as well about when mental health is really important. It's so important to get onto the board agenda, and we need KPIs to kind of measure and to reinforce the importance of this to directors on the board. And what struck me on the train home was not once in that day did I see any people. Of course, the delegates in the conference were there, but what I mean is there were no case studies of people's struggles with mental health or successes of mental health. There was not even, Nick, not even a picture of a person in the brochure that contained all of these statistics. And I know this is a sort of fairly trite example, but for an issue like mental health to be discussed at a conference like that, to be completely dominated with numbers and brands and all of this business language about strategies and branding and communication plans and so on. It was a bit of a gut punch actually to realise what had been disturbing me all day. I thought, well, where are the people?
Where are the
That's such
people?
a human subject to completely overlook, the inclusion of people. I think typifies what I'm trying to say here, which is that do we not have a general tendency to completely dehumanize what we're doing in organizations and forget that organizations are places where people come together to get stuff done together?
Yeah, I know, I completely agree, and I find it shocking as well. And I just to be fair, I think it's you need to run the statistics because they give you they give you the policy tools, don't they? So you can make a big difference to a lot of people by changing things when you see the data. So we need the science, we do need the data. But I think we were chatting just before we got started. I think the thing that can so easily be forgotten when you're entranced by your statistics is that every dot in the calculation is a person. It's not a dot, and every person story is not a statistic. It's unique. And it's so easy when you're looking at the stats to completely forget that they ain't dots, them's people. And I think that's the point, isn't it? And it is shocking, and it's so easy to slip into that. So really great point. I just think it's a wonderful point, and I'm really looking forward to hearing you sort of evolve that and really challenge everybody at conferences, leaders, just to remember that point when they're looking at their leadership going forward. It's really powerful stuff. So thank you so much.
Yeah. You're very welcome.
So I'm just going to wrap up in terms of the timing, and then we'll just stay online for a little bit and answer some questions if that's okay, folks. If you want to hang around for questions, then we'll be a few more minutes, and I'm just going to pace you to the end of the presentation so you get the sort of pointers. Thank you everybody for joining today, and if you can't stay on for the questions, then I hope you have a great day. So just thinking about everything that Phil said, what I want you to do, just taking it all in, what's the one thing that's really resonated for you from listening to Phil James talk about contemporary leadership and some of the challenges and some of those amazing disconnects that we talked about? So, is your style hierarchical, or do you have that problem at your organization, and how can you evolve that? Where can you get help for that? And is the conversation of leadership that you're going through really landing with the people around you? So have you made sure that you've got connection between what's going on all the analysis, whichever we obviously need, but actually the people factor, people on board with that, people connect with that, they feel that, they want that. So have you remembered the human factor? And then that last point about just not getting lost in the science, not getting lost in the sort of dehumanized but really important statistics, and remembering that every journey is unique, and we're not statistics, we're people. So some really powerful points there. So what's the one thing that's landed for you about your leadership, and come back to us about that and think about how you can take that forward. So just a few upcoming things. So by way of beautiful quid pro quo, I've been offered a chance to talk about being resilient, and so that's on the 29th of May on the ILM webinar series. I'm just absolutely privileged to take part in that. Lots of people talk about resilience, and my take on it is going to be very, very practical. So just what's the how of it? So let's get away a little bit from the theory. We'll talk a bit about how the brain works, because that's important. You can, once you know it, you can do stuff with it. But we're going to get straight into what's the practice of resilience, and away from the theory a little bit. So sign up for that, and you can listen to me talking about that on the 29th. Our next strategy cafe is going to be the day after conference. And the team are going to do it, so that's quite cool. And they're just going to be breaking down everything that happened on conference day. So you can listen to us chatter and joke about what happened on conference day, and pick out all of the insights from it and chew them over a little bit. So it should be a more casual, more fun, more engaging kind of version of this. So it's coming up on the 13th of June. And that takes us neatly into conference. So you've heard already that Phil is going to be a speaker. Oh my God, we've got some wonderful speakers. We've got Emma Stroud, who's just fantastic. She's a comedian, but she talks about teaches leaders how to present, how to communicate, how to find the passion in their leadership, which is really powerful. And Mark Gallagher, you will have heard on Strategy Cafe, talking about, you know, the enormous challenges of Formula One, high technology space, high performance space, and how finding the human factor and all of that has been key. Human factor resilience, just how they emphasize and enhance performance and make the technology come to life. Really fantastic presentations. We have a promo on at the moment, so there is a buy a ticket, bring a buddy for free. It's actually not the 13th, it's up until tomorrow night, so closes end of the 17th. So come on the website and you can buy your ticket there. You only need to buy one ticket. We'll just come back to you and say who's your buddy going to be. So there's no great technology behind it. Just buy your ticket and you can bring a buddy along for free. So it's a good deal. So come and buy your tickets now. Seems to be a very popular offer. Don't know why. So so come in and buy. We'll have other promos, but this is probably the best one. So if you do, you can come and meet Phil and explore and challenge him more around some of the stuff he's been saying today, and listen to, you know, him widen and deepen the points he's been making. So so come along on the 12th of June. We're going to be at Bounce, which actually is a big ping pong bar. So very contemporary, if you like. Really great venue, and it's just by Old Street Roundabout, so very easy for most of you to come to. So we hope to see you all there. Thank you for listening, and thank you, Phil. So I'm just going to take a moment, if that's all right with you, just to say thanks, Phil. It's great.
Not at all, Nick. Absolutely, my pleasure. And you can probably tell once I get going, you have to kind of steam in there and stop me. So it's been very enjoyable for me as well. Thank you.
Oh, no issue. I think you were great. You're great. So I've got one question come in just about you know, leadership education, just exploring the differences. It's kind of on the lines of, should I take an MBA? So you know, in contrast between what you're offering at ILM and what you can get from business schools, what's your sort of view of the trajectory for people? Should they be coming down the ILM route? Should they be thinking about taking an MBA? What are the differences?
Sure. So I think either route is valid. So if you're looking for a qualification in leadership and management, for sure, you know, whilst I'm critical of a lot of the content of leadership and management learning, you know, there's a currency around MBAs and qualifications that can't be ignored. And actually, there's some brilliant quality teaching out there as well. And I wouldn't want to knock, you know, it's not a baby and bathwater situation at all. What I would say though is try to, whichever route you do take, try to adapt a sort of critical, it's very difficult, but a critical sort of stance on what it is that you're thinking and learning, and not do as I did, which is simply to accept all this wisdom and go, wow, that's how the world works then, and I'll go and put it into practice. But to remain curious and remain critical about what you're thinking. If you're learning about, you know, marketing plans or pestle analyses or whatever it is, just sort of think, well, what might an alternative way of thinking about this be like? And what are the assumptions about what I'm learning, and how might that, you know, pose some problems? And the final thing that I would say, which is a massive plug for organisations like mine, but find a way of continuing with your learning and education, and once the formal program is over, once the certificate is hanging proudly on the wall in your office, keep going. Keep learning. I think you know, that happens, I think, through conversation, through mornings like this, Nick, through fantastic webinars like this, where we're just asking questions and engaging the grey matter a little bit differently. through conferencing, through reading, and through engaging with professional development. It's the stuff that you offer at Alembic. It's absolutely the stuff that we offer at the Institute of Leadership and Management, and there's loads of that available. But it does require, you know, someone just to sort of not to sit back and think, I've done it now, got the certificate, I'm
Yeah.
now a grade 7 instead of a grade 6.5, and it requires that willingness to keep on learning and keep on engaging.
But one of the things I really like about the ILM site is it gives an opportunity for people who can't, you know, they can't get sponsored for an MBA. You know, the cost model is very different. I mean, you need to work really hard through the Institute of Leadership Management program. It's a substantial program, although it's, you know, it's in consumable bite-sized chunks.
Yeah.
I think one of the things I've really liked about it is that emphasis on practice and experience. And I think for me, one of the points of difference is that you know, that through that route, if you can't get sponsored for the big MBA program, you can connect through the Institute of Leadership and Management as a you know, as an ambitious and self-developing executive, and you can still do something which covers the whole range of leadership skills. You can apply it much more experientially, and you can still get valid portable qualifications at the end of the whole process, which I think, you know, with our partnership, we've helped a couple of clients to do. So for me, it seems like it really reaches out into a much wider space, and this idea of you know, CPD for leadership is just really a good one.
Yeah, well said, Nick. And I think that idea about affordability is a really important one, isn't it? Because it's what we tend to find is, you know, once you've reached a position of some privilege, you can get further privilege heaped upon you. And once you're on the management track, as I was in a PLC, you know, the MBAs are put in front of you and those opportunities are given. Whereas for most people, I guess, for lots of people, they're not. But there is such a rich experience that's available through what we have to offer. And one of the most touching things that I see is people gaining their membership or fellowship of the Institute. And that being a sort of transformational moment, a moment of real achievement that's otherwise been denied. And you know, that's a fantastic thing to be doing for people and for the world of leadership and management.
I agree, and I think that that emphasis on the experience side of things that you guys bring, I think, is really powerful. Because I mean, we were chatting, it's sort of going very off track here, which we'll bring it to a close in a sec, but chatting about this new initiative that you guys have through some of your colleagues in the kind of like the Viva idea, the interview at the end of a process. And again, for me, you know, that takes us away from the sort of the classic challenge of you know, facing a paper and writing responses to questions, and more into my experience and how I would apply this, which, you know, for leadership, it's quite powerful because it takes you into what people's day-to-day life is and makes that valid as part of their education, which I think it is. And so I really like that. I think it's a really, really good initiative.
Yeah, I'm smiling, Nick, partly because I know right now my son is enduring a GCSE exam where he's sitting and writing for a couple of hours, poor thing. So, you know, whereas, yeah, contrasted with what we do, look, there's a really simple reason why there's a conversation at the end of our sort of digital learning routes. You know, you have to talk to somebody. And that's because that's where leadership and management comes alive, isn't it? Through conversation with people. That is the ultimate tool of leadership and management. So I think it resonates, and I think it makes the whole thing accessible as well for people.
I mean, nice way to finish, because it brings us back to where we started, which is it's all about the human factor.